The medieval period was an age in which barbarism mingled with chivalry, and the noblest sentiments often gave way to baseness. Perhaps in no other historical figure are these contradictions better reflected than in Edward of Woodstock, Crown Prince, but never King of England, one of the most talented and cruel commanders of the Middle Ages. Edward was born on June 15, 1330, at the royal castle of Woodstock in Oxfordshire, as the son of King Edward III and Queen Philippa of Hainaut. In 1346, his father crossed the English Channel to claim the throne of France. The king of that country had died without issue, and as the grandson of the deceased, Edward III considered himself more entitled to claim the scepter than Philip, who had already crowned himself king. In just a month, on August 26th, the Battle of Crécy would take place, in which the English were outnumbered by the French king's army, twice as numerous. Edward III assigned the prince the mission of commanding the English vanguard. The prince's insane courage in the fight led to the complete destruction of the enemy. Tradition has it that, in order to be more easily recognized on the battlefield, the king would have asked his son to wear black armor, from which he would later earn the reputation of the Black Prince. The Great Battle, which would take Edward's fame beyond seas and countries, would take place on September 19, 1356, at Poitiers. As at Crécy, the English were outnumbered. They had only about 10,000 soldiers, compared to the nearly 50,000 at the disposal of the new French king, John the Good. But the military genius of the young man, who was only 26 years old, would tip the scales of victory in his favor. The French army was crushed, with 2,000 soldiers taken prisoner. King John the Good himself was captured and taken to London, where the prince made a triumphal entry, like the Roman generals of old, on May 24, 1357. He treated John with all courtesy, and after arriving in London, they prayed together at the tomb of St. Thomas Becket. On October 10, 1361, Prince Edward married Princess Joan, sister of John Plantagenet, Earl of Kent, in St. George's Chapel Royal at Windsor Castle. Although it was customary for aristocrats and royal offspring to have numerous mistresses, both before and after marriage, the young prince apparently showed an attraction to young men, but this did not prevent him from later falling in love with Joan, who was his blood relative. In 1369, Pedro the Cruel, King of Castile, whose throne had been usurped by his brother Henry of Trastamare, would appeal to Edward for help. The prince did not like Pedro, whom he knew to be a cruel ruler, hated by his subjects, but he saw in this conflict an opportunity to weaken the power of the French, who supported Henry. At the head of 30,000 men, the Black Prince entered Spain and covered himself with glory. But the English army returned to France decimated by disease and famine. Edward himself was struck by a mysterious illness. Some claim it was dysentery, others talk about cirrhosis. It seems that the prince had a strong passion for hearty meals, abundantly sprinkled with wine, and even syphilis, although the shameful disease would not be reported in Europe for more than a century. The prince also returned from Spain filled with great sadness, upon hearing the news that his son Edward had died at only 6 years old. Depressed, he left the care of the continental wars to his brothers and ceded the principality of Guyenne to his father. Feeling his end was near, on June 7, 1376, he wrote his will in the Great Royal Hall at Westminster. In just one day, he would die, to the mourning of the entire kingdom, but his embalmed body would not be buried in Canterbury, next to the altar of St. Thomas Becket, until September 29th, the day the church celebrated the Archangel Michael. Religious services were held throughout England to repose the troubled soul of the one who had been the hope, pride, and glory of the kingdom. But perhaps the most moving gesture was made by the King of France, who personally attended a service held in Paris in memory of the most respectable adversary the French had ever faced.